And go. Ah, we have been doing so good until that point. So good, so good.
Mitch. We are here for NCAA Football Week 2 reviews. Go check out our Week 3 picks that actually came out earlier this week than the review, just because everybody on is a fun pick. That so we have one Alabama now to win 20-19. Nebraska, who is now number 10, beating South Carolina 4-30. We have Bill 225. We got beating Kansas 40-12. We have Appalachian State beating 1.5 million dollars to beat Texas A&M in college station. We've got number 4 Tennessee on the road winning against in over. We've got Georgia taking care of business against Samford 33 nothing. Kentucky Florida, Ole Miss beating San Jose State narrowly 24-16. LSU whooping up on Southern 65-17, and Mississippi State coming down to Arizona that would beat Arizona 39-17. There are a couple games on the slate that I'd like to talk about. We'll start with them because let's get started with the big SEC matchup of the week: Kentucky versus Florida. Now, the quarterback looked great in this game, but Will Levis looked a heck of a lot better than Anthony Richardson. Mitch, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I love both of these quarterbacks. I love Anthony Richardson and I love Will Levis. I think these are both fantastic QBs. Richardson has a lot of potential, and Will Levis, he's got a huge arm, but Richardson in particular, he has a huge NFL potential with his ability to run the football and his ability to throw the football because he has a huge arm. His only issue is he doesn't really know what to do with the football, as he clearly has some. He doesn't really have football smarts. If we can just
He
say
doesn't have
that.
football IQ. He doesn't have that football IQ. Anthony Richardson, by the way, 14 of 35 touchdowns and 2 picks with a QBR of 3.8, which is still
Rivaling,
higher.
rivaling
Still,
Spencer Petras right
still
there.
higher though by a whole 2.5 points.
Yeah. But I mean, honestly, I like Kentucky's. I like both of these teams. I still think Florida's going to have a really good season. Trevor Etienne looks like Travis Etienne. He looks like his older brother. He looks just as good. So that's going to be big for the Gators this season. And then, like Kentucky, I mean, they're led by Will Levis. But both of these are very good teams and are going to be tough outs in the SEC.
Oh, 100%. Man, I'd love to have Bob Stoops' job. Man, just get us to a bowl game.
I'd also love the, and I'd love to just be at that wherever that site was where Will Levis and the Wildcats got to eat a bacon wrapped alligator.
They ate a bacon wrapped alligator at team dinner. I think a couple days later. That's impressive. And then we'll do one. We'll do the other big SEC game. Like I said, the other ones are in the other conferences. We'll cover them later. But we have Appalachian State, like I said, being paid $1.5 million to go on the road and put a whooping on Texas A&M. Texas A&M's offense does not look good. Like I said, I don't know what I'd set the like I said on last night's video. I don't know what I'd set the over under as if Texas A&M lined up against Iowa. It would be very low though. Their offense is atrocious.
Well, this A&M team is very young, and it has loads of potential with the insane amount of five-star recruits that it has. But obviously, like you said, the offense does not look good against Sam Houston State. They even struggled. I mean, they put up 31, which is, I mean, a decent number. But against a team like Sam Houston State, if you're really as good as advertised, you should be blowing that team off the floor, and they really didn't. Now,
And
there
we
was
put
a
up
lightning
48
delay in the
points.
middle of that game, but still, you should be able to, put up a pretty, I'd say at least decent game up on a team like Sam Houston State, and they really didn't. Also, considering that Appalachian State gave up 63 points to North Carolina just a week before.
Their
So
defense
I
is
would have
good.
thought you would have been able to put up more than 14 on your own home field, but that didn't necessarily happen. And Haynes King and company over at A&M just did not look all that impressive at home.
One of the three big winners out of the Sun Belt. We'll get to the other two very shortly here, but definitely a big win for Appalachian State. Michigan is now not the only team to lose at home to Appalachian State, which I'm very happy about. All right, let's move on to the Big Ten. In the Big
Rough
in the
week for the
Big
Big
Ten,
Ten.
rough week for the Big Ten West. Let's put it how it is. All right, in the Big Ten, we have Michigan finding its official QB1 as JJ McCarthy officially been announced as starter. They beat Hawaii 56-10. Nothing not expected. Ohio State takes care of business 45-12, which again I'm still shocked they didn't score as many points as I thought they would, but it's early in the season. Everybody can
No
figure it
Jackson
out.
Smith and Jigba.
Makes sense. Minnesota kicking Western Illinois 62-10. That's the best team in the Big Ten West as far as I'm concerned right now.
Yeah.
Duke going on the road and upsetting Northwestern 31-23. Penn State beating Ohio 46-10. Washington State going on the road to beat number 19 Wisconsin 17-14. Maryland beating up on one of the worst FBS teams in Charlotte 56-21. Michigan State taking care of business 52-10 against Akron. Iowa State winning a barn burner 10-7 game over Iowa. Illinois is kicking the crap out of Virginia Shock, surprisingly 24-3. Purdue beats Indiana State 56-0. Rutgers beats Wagner 66-7. Georgia Clay Helton ends Scott Frost's coaching career as Georgia Southern beats Nebraska 45-42. And Indiana barely handles business after losing for a bit on the road at home against Idaho 35-22. There's a couple games that I'd like to breeze through in this, just because there's a lot of games that have a lot of meaning. I mean, first off, Wisconsin and Iowa do not look good. Iowa specifically looked really bad. And I'm not even saying I don't know how good of a team Iowa State is. But I mean, you score 14 points total against Iowa State and South Dakota State. You have one touchdown on the year. You have more safeties than touchdowns still after 2 weeks, and you played at home against two teams that you could very easily beat. Now, they did beat one of them, but barely. I feel like Iowa is the one what is our concern level on Iowa right now? Is it reached should we worry about this team making a bowl, or how bad are we worrying about Iowa right now?
Well, I would say for the Hawkeyes, they need to find an offense. Because it's clear that their defense is very good. I mean, they've given up only 13 points all year, but they've only scored 14 all year. So it's clear that they have a very good defense. Not many teams are able to score on them. The problem is they can't score on anybody else, and they need to find some sort of offense. I mean, last season they didn't really have the greatest offense on the planet, but they had a good running game, Tyler Goodson. But now that he has graduated, it seems their running game is just now dead. And since both of their quarterbacks suck, their offense is completely dead. And so I would say for Iowa, if you want to have a good season, then you need to figure out an offense. Because I thought, Iowa always has kind of like a slower start to the year. They don't necessarily blow out every team. And so I thought, you know what, this Iowa State game will be the test. This Iowa State game will be the real test for whether or not this Iowa team actually is good. And then they lose it, and then they lose by 3. And I go, yeah, they're not good. Their offense just, like you said, it looked anemic. Could not move the football. It couldn't move the football against South Dakota State. And as much as this Iowa team loves to pull upsets at home, unless they can get an offense, They're not getting hardly anything at home, let alone on the road.
That was a game that I circled on our calendar as I'm scared of. I'm a lot less scared at this point in time
With
after
our
watching
defense,
Iowa.
I think we might get three safeties on their on their offense with how
I
bad
don't
it
I
is.
don't care how good their defense is. We might just win 3-0 and walk out of there happy.
We'll
Let's move
probably
on to
win
some of
like
these other games.
13-3 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Let's move on to some of these other games. Obviously, Wisconsin not looking as good as we thought. Are you still out on Graham Mertz?
Well, I've always been out in Graham Mertz. He sucks. This Wisconsin team, I was looking at their running game because I love their running backs. Both of their running backs are very good. They have Ches Maluzzi, a transfer from Clemson, who offsets their enormous other running back in Braylon Allen, and that I really thought would be the two-headed monster for Wisconsin while Graham Mertz has kind of existed because I am not a Graham Mertz fan. But I really thought that this running game would really carry Wisconsin this season as they have a good offensive line. They have a solid defense. And, I thought this Wisconsin team would run away with the West. And then they lose to a Washington State team that could barely beat Idaho, of who Indiana could barely beat too, which should tell you how bad Idaho is and how bad Washington State is. So the fact that you would lose at home to a team like Washington State, um, it does not show it doesn't send a good signal. It doesn't send a good
No.
sign. It doesn't. It shows that you're not as good as you advertise.
Mertz did play a pretty decent game though. 18 for 31, 227 with 2 touchdowns and an interception. The QBR is 72.9. That's a pretty good game. He actually played a pretty good game. The rushing game was actually the lackluster one in this one.
Which was very
Uh,
surprising.
Braylon Allen only averaged 4.7 yards per carry on 21 carries, and Belusi only averaged 2.9 yards per carry on 15. So definitely a lot trickier, but big win early on for the Pac-12 in Washington State. I just wanted to stick to them for taking USC and UCLA. We got a couple more games we got to get to. Duke. I was not like insanely high on this Northwestern team because I was never really high on the Nebraska team, but I thought they'd be able to beat Duke at home. I mean, let me pour into this. What happened? What happened? I mean, oh my gosh, Ryan Holinsky threw 60 passes. What the heck?
Is
I
this
mean,
Northwestern or is this Purdue?
this is Northwestern. Ryan Holinsky was 36 of 60, 435 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception with a QBR of 61.8. I mean, it looks like he got sacked a couple times, but I mean, their running backs, their best back was 3.8 yards averaging for Hull on 17 carries. Wow, he threw 60 times. That's ridiculous.
It's
Versus
almost like
Waters on Duke.
Aiden O'Connell throwing for 64 or 63 against Penn State.
Versus Waters on Duke running for 10 carries, 91 yards with 2 touchdowns, while Leonard, their quarterback, only threw 24 times. So obviously, big win for Duke. I did not expect them to come into Northwestern and beat them. I thought Northwestern was a better team, but look at that, good for them. Any quick thoughts on that one before we move on?
I mean, Northwestern's a young team, and I mean, that's I mean, it was obviously not a good season from last year. I thought that Nebraska game was a sign for maybe better things to come for Northwestern, and now they have let down against the lowly Blue Devils team, and so
Yeah,
yeah, not all that impressive.
exactly. Moving on to probably one of the more surprising outcomes of the day. Illinois at home winning 24-3 against Virginia as I cry in the corner as I picked Virginia in the fantasy league. Brendan Armstrong played a terrible game, 13 for 32, 180 yards, and 2 interceptions with a QBR of 8.3. Not great, not great. Um, the Illinois defense was stifling. Tommy DeVito played a decent game at 17 for 25, 196 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. But it looks like Brown, what was this? I thought it was Chase Brown, 20 carries for 146 yards. Illinois didn't really do anything special offensively. Their defense looked awesome. Which honestly might be one of the things that makes them decent this year.
Well, that
I
definitely
know.
has been the strength of of this Illinois team so far this season. And the Indiana game was really the only game of which the defense kind of was a bit shaky, and even their defense. I mean, they completely shut down the Indiana running game. Indiana's rushing attack was terrible in this game. The only reason Illinois lost is because Indiana's defense had shut down Illinois for a good part of that game, and they, ran Chase Brown into the ground, running him 36 times and then also getting 199 yards. But this Illinois team, the biggest thing for them was they went up and down the field. They kept moving the ball on Indiana, and really they dominated that game. But the problem was they kept turning the ball over, which kept giving it to Indiana, and of course the Hoosiers would get points out of it. And so that's really what lost that game for the Illini was all their costly turnovers. And you look at this Virginia game, like you said, they completely shut down Brenton Armstrong, who's a good quarterback, as he did not play well. They had 42 yards rushing only. That was it. And they had
One of those was a
180
big
through the air.
one of
So,
those was a big 21-yard breakaway.
yeah.
Half of those rushing yards are on one play.
And I do like the running back. I do like Chase Brown. I think he's a solid running back. But this Illinois team, I mean, honestly, if you look at the Big Ten West, I think your best teams are probably Minnesota, Purdue, and Illinois.
We'll see what Nebraska does after firing Scott Frost. Which brings us to our last game in the Big Ten: Georgia Southern and Clay Helton coming into Nebraska and finally ending Scott Frost's tenure, 45-42. We won't spend too much time on this because we did talk about it on the last video a little bit. So I don't want to repeat too much, but obviously big win for Georgia Southern, and yeah, typical Nebraska over the past 6 years.
Well, I mean, Nebraska. This is they're not. I mean, I really thought this would be a decent team with getting transfer Casey Thompson in, decent QB from Texas, but instead you see the exact same thing. They lose a close game to Northwestern. They have a troublesome time with North Dakota, or I think it was North Dakota, and they end up knocking off North Dakota. But then they play Georgia Southern and Clay Helton, which, by the way, huge win for Clay Helton with his brand new team now getting fired from USC and going to Georgia Southern. Huge win for Clay Helton. And, for Nebraska, I think, I mean, obviously they fired Scott Frost, and yeah, it was time. After losing the Georgia Southern, you don't have an excuse anymore.
If you lose to Clay Helton, you don't have an excuse.
Well, it's not Clay Helton. It's Georgia Southern. I mean, it is Clay Helton, but Georgia Southern in and of itself, is not exactly the greatest team. You should be beating them. But this Nebraska team, now with Scott Frost out the window, we'll see what this Cornhuskers program does. But depending on what guy they bring in, I could definitely see Nebraska, being a relevant team, because really, when you think of the Michigan Wolverines, think of the days when the Wolverines were pretty much irrelevant to most of the country, like the Lloyd Carr days, and after Lloyd Carr was out, I mean, and then you had Rich Rod and he sucked, and you had Brady Hoke and he sucked, and it wasn't
That's when it
until
really dropped off. That's when it really dropped off.
yeah, and the
Those Rich
Wolverines
Rods.
were pretty much. I mean, those days the Wolverines were pretty much Texas at that point because they did nothing. But then it was when Jim Harbaugh came in that the program became relevant again. We're rolling out mostly double-digit wins each season, and I mean this past season we got to the playoff for the first time. So depending on what guy Nebraska brings in with the pedigree of that football program, Nebraska could very well go from right now just being completely irrelevant and nobody cares to being a contender.
All right, let's move on to the Pac-12 now. We've got Oklahoma State, number 11, taking care of business against Arizona State, 34-17. Got Utah taking their anger out on poor Southern Utah, winning 73-3. We've got Washington State, obviously again beating Wisconsin 17-14. Air Force putting the whoop down on Colorado 41-10. Cal beating UNLV 20-14. Washington beating Portland State 52-6. UCLA beating Alabama State 45-7. USC going on the road to Stanford and beating them up 41-28. Oregon also taking out their anger on Eastern Washington, winning 70-14. Oregon State narrowly edging out Fresno State 35-32, and Mississippi State beating Arizona 39-17. I don't really have too many games I really care to linger on too much. Oregon Fresno State was fun, but I don't really think there's too much of an impact on much else outside of that game.
We win for
Nope.
Oregon State on the road.
It was a good win for Oregon State on the road, and USC good win on the road. I know it's Stanford, but
Well,
still good win
considering the
on the road.
problems that USC has had with Stanford for the past however many years, that is a good win for USC. And that Arizona State Oklahoma State game, Arizona State was making that game for a long time, and they were honestly in it for a good period of it until the very end. So, as much as there are a lot of issues in the Arizona State program, they still showed that this is not a bad team, and they're not gonna go. They're not. You're not gonna be able to take them out easy. You're not gonna go away easy.
Exactly. All right, and we move on to the ACC now. We've got Louisville beating UCF on the road 20-14. Syracuse absolutely obliterating UConn 48-14. Miami actually struggling, but beating Southern Miss 30-7. Wake Forest going on the road to Vanderbilt, beating them 45-25. Again, Duke beats Northwestern. North Carolina 35-28 on the road against Georgia State. NC State 55-3 win at home against Charleston Southern. Clemson's offense still looks anemic, 35-12 win against Furman at home. Obviously, the Tennessee Pitt one will come back too. Illinois, Virginia. And then Georgia Tech beats West Carolina 35-17, and Virginia Tech beats Boston College 27-10. I think there are two things I want to talk about for this. Number one, Pitt. Pitt's offensive line. We won't spend too much time on this. Go watch the last video. We spent a lot of time on this in that one. But Pitt's offensive line looked absolutely awful. Tennessee's defensive line made the quarterback's life living hell. And I mean, we saw what happened. It ended up injuring Keith Slovis. So
We'll see if he plays against Western Michigan, but yeah, the Pitt offensive line got decimated by Tennessee all game long. And the fact that Pitt, even with however how many times Slovis got hit and then eventually got taken out of the game with an injury, they still sent it to overtime, and of course Tennessee still won. But this Pitt offensive line just, like you said, it got decimated, and it was not a good look. Of course, I was listening to it at work, but every time I keep hearing and Slovis gets hit as he is thrown, I'm like, what are they doing? You lay on the offensive line? Like, what is there an offensive line? I mean, that's what it sounded like every time. There's like, and Slovis gets hit as he was thrown. It's like your offensive lineman doing the Olay? Like, what's going
he
on
was
up there?
he was getting the ball out though. Like he was getting hit, but he was getting the ball out. But he was
Yeah, and
still
he was
getting hit.
still delivering passes. He was still getting it out. They were still completing passes. I mean, he did a fantastic job, and he really, honestly, he kept hitting that game the entire time. And it was off to a really good start. It is ironic because the last time these two played, and this was back in Knoxville, it actually was the exact opposite way. Tennessee started the game, up 10-0, and then Pitt was able to come back and take the lead before halftime, and then never relinquished it. And Tennessee did the exact same thing. Or I'm sorry, Pitt did the exact same thing. They got off to an early 10-0 lead. Tennessee then came back late and took the lead just before halftime. And I mean, they got tied, of course, going into overtime, but they really never relinquished the lead.
Exactly. Yeah, but I mean, big win for Tennessee.
Big win for the Volunteers. Yeah, I mean, this is a
Obviously, I think more than anything, their defensive line looked awesome. But against that O line, I'm sure anybody would look awesome. Their secondary looked atrocious, though. So, good win. And then the big one that I want to talk about is the only team in this conference that we're pretty sure. I mean, there's a couple teams that could, but the most likely team in this conference too that would be able to make the college football playoff, Clemson. Do we think that offense is good enough to make them go undefeated?
Only if Cade Klubnik is the quarterback of this team. I like Klubnik. Watching him against Georgia Tech, guy's got a big arm. He was very accurate against Georgia Tech late in that game, and I'm watching him and I'm like, why is this guy not the starter? Why
I
is
mean,
it
obviously,
DJ and not him? I mean, he in the little time frame that Cade played against Georgia Tech, I'm like, my gosh, this guy is awesome. He's way better than DJ. Why are they leaving him in instead of Klubnik? Because if you put Klubnik in that offense, against Georgia Tech, he was thrown into tight windows. He was making long passes. He was doing it all. He was running and moving with his legs. I mean, he was doing everything that you would want in a quarterback as a true freshman. I'm like, he's way better than DJ. Why are they not starting him?
obviously
But
their defense is good.
well, of
And
course,
they got the win, but 35 only 35 points at home against Furman. A little
not
sketchy. All
special.
right, we move on to our last conference.
And I
We
did want
have
actually before we move on, I did want to mention North Carolina.
okay.
Close win on the road again against another Sun Belt team. But this North
Georgia,
Carolina team is very interesting as they're
very
actually
very
off
much
to a
so.
3-0 start, and their next game is going to be at home against Notre Dame.
They should be ranked. Like, I'm sorry, they should be ranked over Texas A&M at this point. And we'll get to that at the end because we'll go over the rankings at the end. But I'm shocked they're not ranked. But Georgia State was a good team. But getting wins against both App State on the road and Georgia State on the road is a good way to start the season. Drake May looks really good. Anyway, let's move on to the Big 12 here. We've got obviously Oklahoma State beats Arizona State. We talked about Alabama and Texas, but we'll talk about that a bit more in depth in this conference. Kansas State again beats Missouri. Texas Tech with a huge win at home against number 25 Houston in double overtime, 33-30. Iowa State beats Iowa. Kansas in overtime on the road ends West Virginia's Dame with a pick six in overtime. Oklahoma beats Kent State 33-3. TCU beats Charleston 59-17, and then Baylor loses on the road to a tough BYU team 26-20 again in double overtime. Lots to go on in this conference. Let's talk about the new game, Alabama, Texas. Do you think this team wins if Quinn Ewers doesn't go out?
Honestly, I could totally see it. I mean, Texas was in that game even with Quinn Ewers out. I mean, I don't know if it really makes that much a difference because Hudson Card still held his own.
He
But
was rolling. Quinn Ewers was rolling before he
yeah,
got hurt.
and that's the thing because I mean Hudson, like I said, Hudson Card held his own, but Quinn Ewers was on fire until he got hurt, and that is a huge loss for Texas and a big break for the Crimson Tide, who, like I said, they honestly could have lost that game if it wasn't for Ewers getting hurt when he did. But I very well think that if Ewers was able to play that entire game, he didn't get hurt. Longhorns very well could have taken the taken it and got the upset.
Exactly. I mean, very fun game. I will ask you this: are you more concerned for Alabama or more surprised with Texas? Which one are you?
More surprised by Texas, I'd say, because we know that Bama's a fantastic team. They obviously have the talent on all sides. I think this is just that the Longhorns are being underestimated. And it is really just because, they always say, we're back, and no one ever buys into it because they've said it for 30 billion years now. But this Texas team finally actually has, the talent. They actually finally have, established. Like before, they made those claims, and it was like, what you have to base it on? That you've got some, people that you like and you think are good. But now you got, like I said, you got Quinn Ewers, who, according to Pro Football Focus, has got like the one of the highest grades for a quarterback coming out of high school, next to Andrew Luck and Trevor Lawrence, which is very high praise. You got B. John Robinson, which is widely considered one of the best running backs in probably college football right now. And then you also got Xavier Worthy, who's a really good wide receiver. And you got other guys in that receiving core who are pretty good. You got Jaleel Billingsley. I don't know if he did anything, but that's a transfer from Bama, decent player for Texas at tight end. Um, I love their offense. The question is going to be, can their defense hold up all year? Because holding Bama to 20 is very impressive. So we'll see if they can do stuff like that. I think very well. I mean, after seeing this game, I think Texas is your Big 12 champion. I think they probably win out. But and even with Hudson Card, because like I said, he still held his own against Bama. I could very well see Texas go undefeated the rest of the year, probably win the Big 12 because yours will be back by then, and they go to the playoff. But we'll see what the Longhorns look like with Hudson Card. That's going to be big coming up against UTSA. What does Hudson Card look like in another start now with Ewers gone? So that'll be big for the Longhorns. But I do like this team. They look really good.
I can see that. I'm not buying into it just yet because I bought into it too early before. So I'm gonna wait a couple more weeks on that, but I can see it. And the only other one we'll really talk about is, I mean, BYU looked really good against Baylor. BYU, if they can win out, they'll have an amazing resume for a group of five. They'll have the best resume of a group of five team ever. So we'll keep a watch out for that Baylor team. Sorry, not the Baylor team, that BYU team.
Yeah, big game, big win for the Cougars. I mean, that's gonna be a future Big 12 game right there. I mean, because BYU is going to the Big 12, that's going to be matchups that they're going to have in the future. So that's huge for the Cougars to come up with that win at home against what really is the defending Big 12 champions. So really, like when you go to the Big 12, you just beat the defending champs. That's really impressive. And like you said, they do have a very difficult schedule with games against still Arkansas and Notre Dame, and I think they have one on the road against Stanford, but who really cares? They got another one against Liberty, Boise State. I think they got in there too.
And
So,
that's on the road.
oh yeah, road,
Ford
yeah.
Field.
But BYU's got a very difficult schedule. They gave themselves a big challenge, and this is one of those big games, and they got the win. And actually, next week, this coming week, they're at Oregon, and that's even bigger yet. Because
Exactly.
I mean they did beat Baylor at home, which is very impressive. Now you go into the Autzen Zoo, and we know how rowdy that place can be. So well, that is a big test as well for BYU, and good
Exactly.
win honestly for Texas Tech beating Houston. Nice win for them at home, and
Nice win for that, and then Kansas had a nice win too.
yeah, wow, I was really surprised by that considering how close West Virginia played Pitt, and I saw Pitt against Tennessee. It's like, well, maybe they're not as good as I thought, but I did like
I'm scared for Pitt.
JT Daniels looked really good against that Pitt defense, and so I thought, oh, West Virginia might have, a decent year, and then they have a letdown against Kansas. I'm like,
He looked
okay,
good against that Kansas defense. It's just that West Virginia
West
defense
Virginia's
was
defense
bad.
did nothing, but
And
I
then
mean that's the
we
Big
got
12 for you.
we got one more game that's non-conference game. Obviously, you guys have been waiting for this one as well. Number 8 Notre Dame at home, falling to Marshall, 26-21 in one of the most pitiful offensive games I think I have ever seen in my entire life. Obviously, Ty Buckner, who is actually now out for the season, I think, with an injury.
I think it was
Um,
like 6 weeks. I don't remember. I don't think
it
it's
was
the
it was
whole
only
year.
it was a while.
Yeah.
18 for 32, 201 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. In for a little bit at the end of the game with after Buckner got hurt, threw a touchdown, but also threw an interception. They just threw like multiple interceptions late. And they just could never get on their roll. Obviously, a pick six was the huge one, but wow, Notre Dame looks bad. They dropped out of the rankings completely as they should have.
Yeah, Notre Dame did not look good at all against Marshall. I mean, this was a team that played it close with Ohio State, and everyone after seeing that game was like, "Oh wow, this is going to be a really good team." And then they have that enormous letdown against I mean, Marshall's okay, but compared to Notre Dame, it's like, yeah, they should be blowing them off the face of the earth, and they didn't. And yeah, Buckner was not good. And he got hurt in that game, and their running game also kind of struggled for a good for pretty much the good majority of that game. As their two, guys with the biggest carries was their quarterback, but the running back had 10 carries for 33 yards. That's not good. And also the big issue, I think, for Notre really the only good offensive player it seems that Notre Dame has is Michael Meyer. And while Michael Meyer is really good, you gotta get the ball to him somehow. And if that's the only option on your offense, or that's going to double team him every single time, it's going to make uh, moving the football very difficult. And that kind of showed against Marshall, as you had Michael Meyer with 8 catches, 103 yards and a touchdown, and you had no, not him. I'm trying to get the other guy. You also had Lorenzo Styles having a decent game of 7 for 69, and then you had 4 other guys get 2, 2, 1, 1. You gotta find other options out there. Obviously, they were trying to target Michael Meyer pretty much the entire game, and then Styles, and it just didn't work.
No, exactly. All right, and then let's end as we usually do with their top 25 review. Obviously, the new AP poll's been out. Georgia moves up to number 1. Alabama slides down to number 2. Ohio State 3. Michigan 4. And Clemson at 5. Same, pretty much the same, except those top 2 switching. I don't think we really have any issues, right? Those top 5.
No, I mean, after Texas made it close with Alabama, I think it made sense to put the Bulldogs just ahead, considering their domination over the Oregon Ducks and Bama having a close game against a Longhorn team that no one really thought was any good at that point. But I think Georgia's looked probably like a little bit of a better team at this point.
Exactly. All right, and then we've got Oklahoma at 6, USC at 7, Oklahoma State at 8, Kentucky jumping 11 spots up after the win all the way up to number 9, Arkansas up to number 10. Obviously, huge move ups for Kentucky and Arkansas. Obviously, Kentucky after a huge win, as well as everybody else moving up a little bit after Texas A&M and Notre Dame fell. We now move to the 11 through 15. We've got Michigan State at 11. BYU jumps 9 spots up to number 12 after the win against Baylor. Miami at 13, Utah at 14, and Tennessee moves up 9 spots all the way to 15 after the win against Pitt. Move on to the bottom half of the top 20. We've got NC State at 16. We've got Baylor dropping from 9 to 17, which is an 8-spot drop, and Florida dropping 6 spots down to number 18. Wake up 4 spots to number 19, and Ole Miss up 2 spots to 20. And then we get to the bottom 25, which is like the worst bottom of the 20. This hurts my soul looking at this. I don't know why. It's just some of these teams, I feel like there are other teams that are way more deserving. But Texas, after losing, moves up to 21. Penn State moves up to 22, who is not ranked. Pitt falls all the way to 23. Texas A&M falls all the way to 24. And Oregon at 25. I don't think A&M, Pitt, or Texas should be ranked at this point. I know Texas played a really good game against Bama, but I feel like there's other teams that you could be putting in there. Like, I feel like you could be putting in, like, an Appalachian State or specifically North Carolina. North Carolina, I feel like, is more deserving. Oregon
Or
State,
Marshall.
Oregon State is super deserving, I feel. Florida State's played decently. Minnesota's played good. Obviously, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, and Houston dropping out of the rankings. Texas Tech, I mean, won at home against number 25. I feel like they deserve a 25 spot. I just don't think I've seen enough from Penn State, or Texas to justify them moving into the rankings. And then, I mean, I think Pitt and Texas A&M should have both dropped out. I think Pitt, they've played 2 close games, but I just feel like as far as if you watched Pitt in those 2 games, specifically this last game, I don't think they're a top 25 team if you watch them. That offensive line does not tell me that offensive line is seriously just drags them down. And then Texas A&M, I think, should have just dropped out entirely. I think Appalachian State and North Carolina should both be above them. I think that bottom 25 is the only thing I don't agree with.
Well, I mean, really, obviously, when you go up to the top, you got Kentucky, Arkansas, and BYU as massive, and really Tennessee too, all massive risers this week. Big wins for all of them, and big jumps for all of them, as we just talked about. Well, not really for Arkansas, but for Kentucky, BYU, and Tennessee. All actually, well, no, not BYU, but Kentucky, Tennessee, both getting wins on the road. BYU, a big win at home. Really impressive from all those teams. Maybe a little high, I think, for Kentucky, but they're still a decent team. They're still a good team, and so I think they're certainly well deserving after knocking off Florida on the road, which is very difficult. As for the bottom five teams there, I can get on board with you. I guess on Texas, 21 is a bit high after losing. I mean, it was Bama, and that's probably why they got so high is
That's
because they
100%
made it
why.
really close with Alabama, and they're like, well, if they actually we made it that close with Bama, we gotta give them some respect because it is Texas, so we'll put them at 21. Sounds good. I do like Penn. I think I do agree with Penn State though as a ranked team. I mean, this team went into West Lafayette and beat Purdue, which is not easy to do. And yeah, their next game was Ohio, but they beat Purdue, and that's namely what really impresses me. And their next game is on the road against Auburn, so that really proved that this team is worthy of a ranking or not. Pitt looked awful. I probably would have dropped them out after getting really dominated by Tennessee. A&M looked awful. They probably should have dropped out. And Oregon, I
I'm
mean,
fine with Oregon.
they got pummeled by Georgia. I could see someone else going ahead of them, but I don't necessarily disagree with it. But I don't necessarily agree with it either.
I do think if I had it differently, I'd have Texas not in. I'd probably have like Marshall. I'd probably have the three moving in. I'd have Texas, Pitt, A&M not in, and I'd probably have the three in as Marshall, North Carolina, and App State. Especially North Carolina and Marshall. Like those two teams are really deserving. I know. Notre Dame's probably not that good, but hey, they still went on the road and beat Notre Dame. That deserves a ranking. When is Marshall ever going to be ranked again? Like that's what I don't like. Like Texas A&M will be ranked again at some point. Drop them out for now and give like the Marshall like a chance to be ranked, even if it's for 1 week. Like give them a chance at the rankings. They deserve it. But anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Go watch the last one on the picks. Any closing thoughts?
I mean, they're a good week of football. Tune in.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm Jacob. That's Mitch. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great one. Peace.